Atlit-Yam did not vanish in a single instant, and yet it feels as if it was carried away by one enormous wave. Today, the sea off the coast of Israel looks calm and transparent. It is hard to believe that beneath the water, only a few hundred meters from shore, lies a settlement about 9,000 years old. There, under the weight of the sea, rests Atlit-Yam, one of the oldest submerged worlds known to us. It is older than the pyramids, older than most of the great cities of antiquity, and its fate is both quiet and tragic. This settlement was not burned by enemies, did not fall in a siege, and did not disappear into legend. It simply went underwater. Once, this was a living place at the very edge of the land, but in those days the shoreline was different. Sea levels were lower, and where underwater plants now sway, there was dry ground. People did not come here by accident. There was fresh water, fertile soil, easy access to the sea, and everything needed for a stable life. Atlit-Yam arose in an age when human beings were beginning to stop wandering endlessly and were learning to live in one place, to build homes, store food, cultivate crops, and bury their dead close to where they lived. By the standards of its time, Atlit-Yam was a large and well organized settlement. Archaeologists discovered the remains of houses, hearths, work areas, a well, and ritual structures. All of this shows that this was not a temporary camp of fishers and not a random coastal outpost, but a stable world with its own order, habits, and memory. Before the sea claimed it, Atlit-Yam was not just a village at the edge of the land. It was a living, breathing world filled with voices, the smell of smoke, the sound of water at the shore, and the endless motion of human labor. People here rose before dawn. Some walked to the animal pens, some checked fishing nets, some lit the hearth to grind grain and bake flatbread. Daily life was not primitive, it was structured. The people of Atlit-Yam belonged to a time of transition. They were no longer nomads, but people who knew their land well. They grew cereals, kept goats, sheep, pigs, and probably cattle, caught fish, gathered marine resources, and made tools from stone and bone. Their lives depended on nature, but they were not helpless before it. They observed, remembered, and passed knowledge on. They knew the rhythm of seasons, the habits of animals, the time for sowing, and the time of dangerous winds. Their economy was likely diverse and flexible. If the harvest was poor, the sea could provide. If fish moved farther away, there were herds and grain stores to rely on. This made the community stronger. The people of Atlit-Yam probably already understood the value of shared labor. Some worked the land, some tended animals, some fished, others made tools, vessels, and ornaments. This interdependence slowly shaped a real community. Not just a cluster of neighbors, but a society in which each person was part of a larger whole. Their houses were probably low and sturdy, stone foundations, walls of wood, branches, and clay, roofs of reeds reinforced with mud. Homes may have stood in groups, forming close courtyards and narrow passages where life was always in motion. Inside were hearths, grain containers, tools, sleeping places, dried fish, baskets, ropes, and simple objects, each with a purpose. The air may have smelled of ash, milk, wool, and salt. There was no luxury here, but there was order. It is not hard to imagine what a day in such a settlement looked like. At sunrise, dogs barked, wooden parts of structures creaked, and the first fires crackled. Women may have ground grain on stone slabs, mixed water and flour, watched children, mended clothing, dried herbs or fish. Men may have gone to the sea, checked traps, carried water, reinforced walls, tended animals, and shaped tools. But this division was probably never absolute. In small, early communities, everyone had to know how to do many things, and each day demanded flexibility. The elders were not a burden, they were memory itself. They knew how the winds changed, where the paths once ran, when to begin sowing, and when to expect danger. Atlit-Yam had no palaces and no towers, and yet within it one can already feel the foundations of what later became cities: order, shared memory, and collective work. Clothing was simple but not primitive. They likely wore woven garments made from plant fibers, perhaps flax, as well as clothing made from animal skins. Men may have worn short tunics or wraps. Women may have worn longer wrapped garments tied with cords. Ornaments already existed: beads made from shells, bone and stone, pendants, bracelets. Such objects were not only decoration, they may also have marked age, status, family ties, or ritual roles. Some ornaments may even have been passed down through generations, carrying memory just as spoken stories did. The children of Atlit-Yam grew up between the sea and the hearth. They learned not through formal instruction, but through imitation how to carry water, read tracks, untangle a net, or handle flint without injury. They ran over damp sand, played with shells and pebbles, and listened to old stories about winds, fish, and the spirits of water. Perhaps from an early age, they already helped the adults, gathering brushwood, keeping animals away from food stores, carrying small vessels, watching younger children. Childhood was not separated from labor, but it still contained room for laughter, curiosity, and wonder. The culture of Atlit-Yam was deeply bound to nature. In that world, there was no rigid boundary between the sacred and the ordinary. A spring was not just a spring, so it was the center of the world. A stone circle discovered by archaeologists almost certainly had ritual significance. Several large upright stones arranged around a water source appeared to mark a place where the community gathered not only for practical reasons, but for meaning. Here they may have thanked the earth for the harvest, addressed their ancestors, offered the first fruits of the season, or performed rites connected to birth, adulthood, and death. In such a world, the wind could be a messenger, stone a keeper of memory, and the sea a being with whom one had to live in balance. And the dead did not disappear. They were buried near the houses or within the settlement, as if kept inside the circle of the living. Ancestors remained close, not somewhere far away, but beneath the feet of their descendants, at the center of daily life. This tells us much about the people of Atlit-Yam. They did not merely live here, they took root here. For them, the land was not territory, it was an extension of the family line.
Archaeological finds allow us to see these people not as shadows, but almost as neighbors across thousands of years. On the seabed, researchers found the remains of stone buildings, hearths, pits, and wells. They uncovered tools of flint and bone, knives, blades, points, implements for working hides, and perhaps fishing equipment. Bones of domestic animals and fish remains confirm a mixed economy. Grinding stones and food processing surfaces were also found. Ornaments made of shells and small beads show that even in the hardness of everyday life, human beings still sought beauty, symbol, and belonging. Human remains are especially important. Some burials allowed archaeologists to learn not only about the age and way of life of the inhabitants, but also about their illnesses. One of the most famous discoveries was the skeleton of a woman and an infant, providing one of the earliest known pieces of evidence for tuberculosis. This is striking. Even here, at the edge of a prehistoric sea, we encounter not only labor and hope, but also the fragility of the human body, disease, loss, and care for the vulnerable. Archaeology at Atlit-Yam does not tell us about an anonymous past. It tells us about people who loved, suffered, buried their dead, and went on living. We can imagine one of the last quiet evenings. Cool air comes in from the sea. Fire crackles in the hearths. Women lay out food. Elders sit against the wall of a house and watch the horizon darken. Someone repairs a harpoon. Someone sorts grain. Someone chants a long, drawn-out melody. Less a song than something like a spell or a memory. The stones lie firm. Fish dries on ropes. Livestock sleeps in the pens. Children laugh. And in that moment, it seems that this will last forever. But the world around them was already changing. The sea was moving inward. Water in the wells may have been growing saltier. Storms may have become heavier. The familiar shore was no longer as dependable as before. Paths to fishing places disappeared underwater. The elders may have argued over what it meant. Some may have seen the anger of the sea. Others may have believed that the land itself was changing. Surely someone suggested leaving. But to leave meant more than abandoning houses. It meant leaving the graves of ancestors, the spring, the sacred place, the entire world that generations had called their own. So Atlit-Yam likely held on until the very end. And this is the heart of the story. The story of Atlit-Yam moves us not simply because it is an ancient drowned settlement, but because behind its stones we can still see people. Mothers rocking children beside the fire, fishers returning at dawn with heavy nets, craftsmen polishing stone until it turned smooth, elders remembering where the shoreline once lay, a girl with a necklace of shells, a boy catching his first fish, people who did not know that one day only divers and fish would see their homes. And then the sea came, not as a neighbor, and not as a provider, but as a force that could not be argued with. Whether this was the slow retreat of land beneath the rising post-Ice Age sea, or whether the final blow came from a sudden catastrophic wave, we still do not know for certain. One theory suggests that Atlit-Yam may have been destroyed by a tsunami caused by a submarine landslide or volcanic activity in the Mediterranean. If so, its end was swift and terrible. The morning began as usual, then the sea withdrew, the air became strangely still, birds panicked, and a wall of water crashed onto the shore, sweeping away houses, wells, boats, people, and stores of food. After that, the settlement no longer belonged to the land. The sea swallowed Atlit-Yam, but it did not erase it completely. It covered it with sand, silt, and silence. And that very silence preserved it for the future. When archaeologists began to study the seabed near Atlit, what opened before them was not simply a scatter of stones and bones, but a frozen fragment of Neolithic life. Tools, burials, traces of houses, ritual stones, a well, remains of work areas. All of this became not only evidence of destruction, but proof of a mature human world that existed long before writing and states. For science, Atlit-Yam is priceless for another reason as well. Sites like this are almost never preserved so completely. On land, settlements are destroyed over millennia by new construction, farming, erosion, and war. Here, the sea that caused the settlement's death also became its guardian. It slowed the disappearance of its traces. Because of that, we are able not just to imagine, but in some sense to see how one of the early settled worlds of the Eastern Mediterranean once looked. Atlit-Yam matters not only as an archaeological discovery, it reminds us how fragile the boundary is between home and the forces of nature. Human beings have always been drawn to the sea because the sea feeds, connects, and sustains life. But at any moment it can take back what once seemed secure. In that sense, Atlit-Yam is not merely an ancient settlement on the seabed, it is a memory of how early humanity learned to build, love, remember, and resist loss, and how early it also encountered a world more powerful than itself. Today, it cannot be seen from the shore. Waves pass above it, fish glide over it, sunlight trembles across the water. But if we imagine the sea as a thin veil, then beneath it, we can still make out the outlines of life. The stones of houses, the circle of the sanctuary, and the traces of those who once believed they had found their place in the world. They truly had found their place in the world. It was simply that the world proved stronger.